people sabotage their relationships by pushing people away. Other people sabotage their relationships by turning them into content. Let's talk about dating influencer Danielle Walter. Welcome to Character Analysis, the podcast where I play internet detective and armchair psychologist to try and figure out why people do some of the crazy, stupid, and sometimes disturbing things that they do. Now, before we dive in, if you're mental health or self-care focused, then make sure you stick around till the end because I have somebody I want to introduce to you. Danielle Walter is a very savvy, very popular dating influencer on Instagram and TikTok. She started her platform probably about 2 or 3 years ago, and she is the self-anointed brunette Carrie Bradshaw, which makes me cringe only because anybody with self-awareness knows that Carrie Bradshaw was self-obsessed and toxic. Before I go any further, I want to talk about my history of being sort of a dating influencer. I used to write publicly about my dates when I wrote my dating advice column. And I also hosted a dating advice podcast for 7 years. And I see a lot of myself in Danielle, so I feel like I have a particular set of skills that make me adept at analyzing her in a way some others can't. I went back probably about 2 years into her archives and I watched her videos. And like most people who are dating these days, certainly most women who date men, Danielle would go on 2 or 3 dates, things wouldn't work out, and then she'd just move on to the next. And she would do the get ready with me. She would get in the car going to her dates. She would do a postmortem after her dates. And I think she was very relatable. And I still think she's relatable, but for different reasons at this point. And her pattern just seemed to be that when somebody would show interest, when someone would seem available, she would lose interest. And that's just my perception. There was one guy who they'd been on 2 or 3 dates and he wanted her to come watch him run a marathon. And she felt as though that was sort of girlfriend territory and she felt it was too soon for that. And she got a really hard time for that, even though I happen to agree with her. And then there was another guy who she'd gone out with a couple of dates with and he told her he was uncomfortable with her social media presence. And after a few days, he took some time and he went through her content and he contacted her and said, I like what you do. You seem very respectful of boundaries and people's privacy, and basically told her that he'd like to see where things go with them. And Danielle said, and I was just very busy. And, it basically took her a while to get back to him. And then she finally did. And he didn't follow up with her. And to me, it just seems as though she's sort of the queen of self-sabotage. Again, like Carrie Bradshaw. She knows that being so public about her personal life is going to deter a lot of people. And I can vouch for that. It is not something that a lot of people want to sign on for. Much like her, even when I would run into these people who would say, I'm not really crazy about the fact of you write about this stuff, I would get indignant and say, well, this is what I do, and you're either in or you're out, which is something Danielle does. And I realize now, looking back on it, that was my building a brand as a single person became it was a shield. Danielle said at one point with the guy who wanted her to come watch the marathon, she said that, as a sort of a recovering anxious attacher, I don't want to get too invested too quickly. I'm really proud that I laid down that boundary and didn't get too invested with this guy, which is odd because just a few months later, she has dove head first into this relationship with a man who, after their first date, she referred to as her future husband. Now, she sort of took time off from documenting that relationship for about 3 months as the relationship progressed. And then last month, she came out with a 21-part docu-series where she and this guy, his name I think is Lucas or Luca, we'll call him Lucas, they discussed how their relationship unfolded and what it was like to live in that fishbowl of being sort of an online couple and integrating each other into each other's lives. And the first red flag for me, and there's many here, the first red flag for me was how comfortable this guy was having their relationship made into content. Again, as somebody who has done this, one thing I learned very quickly was the people who seemed the most comfortable with it, who were almost eager to have the relationship discussed publicly typically turned out to be narcissistic or opportunistic. So for that reason alone, I side-eye Lucas for being so comfortable with what Danielle does for a living, because most people would be uncomfortable with it. It's a level of vulnerability that many people, men and women, just aren't comfortable with, and that's normal. Second red flag for me, and I shouldn't even number them at this point because, like I said, there are many, but Danielle had said when in, I don't know, episode 3, 2, I lost count. In one of the early episodes, she said that she felt she wanted to date someone for 3 months before they became exclusive, and she broke that rule for Lucas. Why? I don't know, but she did. And so now there's that second example of Danielle sort of compromising her own standards for a guy. Throughout this series, she's doing the majority of the talking, and he is sort of picking up on her cues, and he's adding little things here and there. But for the most part, she's doing all the talking, she's controlling the conversation, and he's just sort of going along with it. Now, to be fair, he says that English isn't his first language, and so I think he might be a little uncomfortable with doing too much talking. At one point, he tries to use some sort of a saying, and he doesn't word it correctly, and she sort of laughs at him and says, "No, you mean case by case basis." I don't know what it is. That's just an example. And then throughout this series, she's pushing the microphone up to his mouth, almost like he's a child. And I don't know what's more concerning here, that she's doing it or that he's letting her do it. But what became clear right away was she needs to be in control. She's in control of this relationship, and I think that's what she needs. I think that's when she's most comfortable. What also jumped out to me, not just in this series, but from watching all of her videos, is she's constantly going. She's traveling, she's going to networking events, she's doing this, she's doing that. And that always makes me wonder if that person is uncomfortable with sitting alone with their thoughts. For people like that, uncertainty is intolerable. And so they constantly have to be in motion, but also controlling things. And self-sabotage really is just a form of control. And another great example of this self-sabotage was Danielle made a whole video as part of this series about how she doesn't know how, but people figured out the identity of the man she was dating, and they were just so very unkind. And then it comes out she had made a whole Pinterest board about this guy just a few days in after their first date with his name on it. And right there, that is self-sabotage. I will say this. I struggled when I was talking about my personal life. It was very difficult for me. I mean, listen, I was dealing with a lot of unresolved trauma. That was part of it. But to have a public persona just made it worse. And it wasn't until I really started delving into that unresolved trauma that I realized I was hiding behind this brand that I had created. And so I just stopped. I just took the website down, and I started my trauma recovery training. And it was within like 4 to 6 months after taking the site down and really starting to heal is when I met somebody. And we were together 4 years. It was the healthiest relationship I'd ever had. We're still somewhat in each other's lives. Our relationship ended a couple of years ago, but I knew right away the only way I could protect this relationship is if I didn't talk about it publicly. If my boyfriend at the time had been comfortable with me talking about him, that would have been an immediate red flag for me. So when I hear her sort of complain about people talking about her relationship and finding out who he is, she always had the option of just not doing things publicly, and she chose not to. And that's where in my opinion, the self-sabotage came in. Like, girl, nobody's forcing you to do this. You're choosing to do this. And there's part of me that doesn't really buy that she was so bothered by the quote-unquote internet shitstorm or whatever she referred to it as. Because deep down, I think what fuels Danielle Walter is attention, is validation. And I think that's why she makes all this stuff public. Because again, I think she has real trouble sitting with her own thoughts. And so She just constantly either needs to be moving or she needs to be somehow gaining the validation and attention from internet strangers. Now, there are a lot of irritating things about this 21-part series, one of which is how she's portraying this relationship in moments. She's curating moments, but she's not really giving an authentic look at this relationship, particularly in the areas where there is a very obvious disparity. Now, she's got a massive platform. He doesn't, right? She has much more to lose than he does if this relationship doesn't work out. It's going to be her reputation, her brand that takes the hit because she's invested herself and her platform into him. And he's not really returning that. So they're really not on the same level when it comes to their careers, so to speak, their brands. Which means they're also not on the same level financially. Now, she talks constantly about the dinners and the trips and the gifts, and you can't help but wonder, not to get all Carrie Bradshaw about it, but I couldn't help but wonder, who's paying for all this stuff? There's one episode where he talks about them going shopping, and he says she's just so good, and she's picking out his clothes. Listen. He's an adult, and she's very clearly trying to make him into who she wants, who she sees herself with. And this is what I mean by she's curating this relationship, just like she curates her platform. She's curating the relationship. She's showing you what she wants you to see, and that's why it's inauthentic. I want to see the downtime. I want to see how do they handle the fact that she's clearly more successful than he is. I want to see how do they handle the fact that she pretty obviously makes more money than he does. Is that a conversation they've even had? Because financial disparity is a huge problem in relationships. And what makes me so uncomfortable, there's so much about this that makes me uncomfortable in terms of how it's being positioned to single women. But one of the big ones is she's trying to normalize that financial disparity, and I'm vehemently against that. She's also curating this relationship like it's a rom-com, right? She's just showing us moments. She had one video where the phone is, strategically placed behind a pan of frying salmon for whatever reason, and they're off in the, they're in the background and they're dancing in the kitchen. I think dancing in the kitchen is adorable. My father and my stepmother used to do it, but she never told me about that until after he passed. And when I said, how come I've never heard this? She said, because that moment was just for us. Danielle is taking these really intimate moments and she's making them public, which is sort of the opposite of it being intimate. It's no longer intimate when you share it. Now, I think this was something that Ben Affleck said to Jennifer Lopez in that movie she did that got trashed, where she was passing around all the love letters that Ben Affleck had written for her. And he's like, well, isn't that kind of, if it's private and you share it with people, then it's no longer private. She's very much selling this relationship as a fantasy, which is really, that kind of tracks as well, because even when you look at the way she decorated her house is very much decorated like the Barbie dream house. Danielle gives the impression that she has this overly romanticized idea of love and relationships. And we don't see the nitty-gritty. We don't see the reality. And that happens a lot, especially in relationships like the one that we're seeing, because she's showing us, they're 4 months in and, oh, look at us, we're still, everything's great. It's 4 months. Everything's, not perfect, but it's like this perpetual honeymoon phase. She wants everyone to think, no, we're still there. And the thing about the kind of relationship that they have, and the thing about being in a relationship with Danielle is, it seems like she travels a lot. She's always doing things that don't necessarily include him. And so that lends to this constant feeling of newness. And the newness lends itself to this heightened anticipation, which comes from these surges of dopamine that she's producing. And when you produce all that dopamine, that's how we stay in the honeymoon phase, right? Because we're producing such high surges of dopamine. He even says in one of the videos that it was like being a kid again, where you get excited that you see each other. That's the dopamine. And when you have that dopamine, right, that tends to cloud your judgment a little bit, because you're not just producing the dopamine, you're also producing a lot of oxytocin. Oxytocin it lowers our inhibitions. We're more tolerant. And when we're producing or overproducing that oxytocin, we tend to be blind to red flags. That's naturally going to create or contribute to this extended honeymoon phase. What ends up happening is eventually real life interferes, right? Eventually things they start to normalize, because they have to. People, they have jobs, they have real life stressors, they have parents that need something, they get whatever. Real life happens. And in that time, the dopamine levels, the oxytocin levels, they normalize. And for somebody who doesn't have a lot of experience getting past the honeymoon phase in a relationship, that can create an insecurity, can create a paranoia of, wait a minute, what's going on? Why don't I feel the way I felt a month ago? Why aren't we spending as much time together? Why aren't we communicating as often? And that can lead to problems in the relationship. And that's something that I wonder about Danielle, just from watching her content. I don't know her entire relationship history, but it seems like over the past few years, she's really never gotten past that initial stage. As I progressed through this 21-part series, I was reminded of when Charlotte met Trey in Sex and the City, and she's on that boat trip with Carrie. Not a boat trip, I think it was like a booze cruise or something like that. And it's Charlotte and Trey, and they're just talking about how they met, and what's her face? Carrie she's heard this story so many times. But the difference was, Charlotte and Trey, it was literally the very beginning of their relationship. It was like a couple of weeks in. But that was a really good learning lesson to see how, you get so caught up in that early phase that you tend to ignore the red flags, which is really what Charlotte did with Trey. Trey was a walking red flag, but he was presented to us as this sort of perfect guy, at least for Charlotte, when really he was just perfect on paper. I'm not even sure Lucas here is perfect on paper or perfect for Danielle. And again, who am I? It's really not my place to be saying something like this, but it really does seem as though she's trying very, very hard to mold him into her perfect guy. And so far, it's very unclear what about him is what made her say, oh, this is my future husband. And I know they gave reasons, like, I think she said that he followed through, or really something kind of innocuous or basic. And he said something about he knew she was his future wife because she prayed at the table on their first date. She had an entire episode about why we work. And I have to say, how long was the episode? I think it was a minute and a half. By the end, I still did not know why they worked. She said, well, it's because you allow me to be, or you give me the room to be funny and goofy and feminine. And he says something about a mentor, which immediately sets off another red flag for me. She does say that something she really likes is how rooted in his faith that he is, which I think is great. That's a core value, and I think that's important. Core values are, I think, what make long-term compatibility. So, and that's a major one. But beyond that, it's unclear what these two have in common. And throughout this series, she's making references to marriage. I guess something he took her on, I don't know, was it for her birthday or something? I don't even know what it was, a month anniversary, whatever that was. He took her kayaking, and she's like, that no better premarital something or other than to go kayaking with each other. And then in another video, she's talking about the pictures that they took and how they're mom and dad photos. They're the pictures that you show your kids. But you don't hear things like that coming from him, which would absolutely give me pause. She definitely seems to be the one pushing this relationship along, which is something that I wouldn't tolerate in my relationship. In 2026, on Rihanna's internet, we are not doing the heavy lifting for men. And he just doesn't seem to be doing anything. She tells him what she wants for her birthday. Oh, I want jewelry because I want to create this little set so that 10 years down the road, I'll have this, I'll have a collection of jewelry from my husband. And I want it small and I want it dainty. Like, he can't even pick out a birthday present for her. And this was very reminiscent to when she told him that she wanted the night that they become boyfriend and girlfriend, she wants it to be a moment, right? She wanted it to be a thing. She's directing this relationship. And again, and she admits it, I want to be able to say 10 years down the road that this jewelry, I got this from my husband. She's curating the entirety of the relationship, and she's thinking years ahead. But here's the problem with that. The problem is that there are a lot of men who have no problem letting women talk about the future of their relationship, talk about how she thinks he's the one, with friends, with families, with followers, all the while knowing or not knowing whether or not the relationship has long-term potential. In a situation like that, they can walk away from that kind of relationship with very little guilt or remorse, because a lot of men are not socialized to think of anybody but themselves, which means that a lot of men are perfectly comfortable letting women humiliate themselves, especially publicly. And I'm not saying that Lucas is going to do that. I'm saying that it's a possibility. And again, I'll repeat what I said at the beginning. The person who's going to take the biggest hit here if this relationship doesn't work is her. Their relationship might not seem ideal to many people. I know that a lot of people think he's just in this for the green card. He's a grifter. He's a love bomber. I don't see that. In fact, he seems like the opposite of a love bomber. He seems to be following her lead, which ultimately is why I think this relationship works. I think he's a very passive person. And I think Danielle is, at least when it comes to her relationship, I think she's more assertive. He's happy to let Danielle tell him what to do, tell him how to lead, which is funny because he's not leading at all. She's leading. It even appears as though he's potentially moving in with her, or at least has been staying at her place. She has this relationship so contained because I think that's just what's better for her. What I do think that he likes about this relationship is that she seems more into him than he does into her. And again, that's an outsider's perspective. I think he likes that she's making him her entire identity, her entire personality. And I think he likes that. This is why I say men or anybody who's okay with someone making their relationship content fodder, anybody who's okay with their partner discussing the intricacies of their relationship publicly, usually is okay with it for a reason. There's a benefit in there for them, whether it's financial, professional, social, whatever it is. But what really bothers me about this docuseries is that it ended in a way that by doing something that, as somebody who has been in the dating space for 2 decades, something that I've always loathed. And it did that whole thing about to the single girl. That's what she titled the last installment of the series. And she's talking to women about, hang in there. Your person is out there too. As though this girl wasn't, like, I'm sorry to say it like this, as though she wasn't perpetually single for years. Like, girl, at this stage, you're just dating somebody that hasn't broken up with you yet. Which isn't to say that he's going to break up with her. Personally, I don't think he will. I'm trying to convey that she's speaking from a place of authority, an authority that she hasn't earned. And she's doing it by creating content that is disguised as being hopeful and encouraging and inspirational, But really, it's just obnoxious, condescending, and smug. Now, I've gone to her TikTok and her Instagram just today, and I've noticed she appears to have taken down a lot of the installments of this series. Probably because it didn't get the reaction she thought it was going to get. One reason for that is content where a woman is centering a man is very tone deaf for 2026. Listen, if that's what a woman wants to do, have at it. But single women are moving away from centering men. They're moving away from dating. There was an entire article a few months ago about why having a boyfriend is embarrassing. And I really think that article was talking about the kind of content that Danielle is producing. The idea of a woman using her relationship for validation or using a man for validation is completely outdated in 2026. But like I said, I've been there. I've been where she is. And I know that I continued with my column and my site longer than I feel I should have. And one of the reasons for that was I felt as though I had to have a traditional happy ending before I ended my story. I was worried that if I just stopped without having a relationship, people would think, oh, she failed. And so I kept going and I kept going until one day I just decided I just don't care about that anymore. When you make trying to find your person, right? When you make that your brand, your identity, and you struggle to do it year after year after year, you're hyper aware of what people might be thinking about you. They might be thinking, hey, you're the problem. And the truth was, I was the problem. I mean, men are stupid and I don't respect them, and they weren't great, but I was so unhealed. I can understand why Danielle is pouring so much of herself into this relationship, because it could be that after 2 or 3 years of doing this, she might be tired of doing this. She might be looking for an out. And finding this kind of relationship might just be her out. I want to be clear. I don't think Danielle Walter is a bad person. I just think that, like me, when I was doing this, Danielle is her own worst enemy. I'm interested in hearing what your thoughts are on this relationship in this docuseries. Please share your thoughts in the comments. And make sure you're following me on TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram at My Character Analysis. If you want the bonus and the behind-the-scenes video contents and shorts, you can subscribe to my YouTube page or to my Patreon. I'm going to have both links in the episode description. Now, I've shared before that I have ADHD and depression. I've also discussed that I'm the youngest of 5 girls. So you would think that I would have learned how to put on makeup, especially having a sister that worked at Sephora. But the ADHD, as well as the depression, made putting on makeup very challenging for me because of that perfectionism that a lot of people with ADHD have. And so I would get very intimidated and overstimulated and overwhelmed, and I just quit. I gave up. I've curated an Amazon storefront to highlight products that are for people like me, people who have low energy days, who maybe get overwhelmed or overstimulated, or people who just need to put themselves first. There's sections like Easy Beauty for Hard Days, where I feature makeup products that have minimal steps and that don't overwhelm. I also have a segment for executive function support. You can find my dopamine necklace and Sammy the Sloth, the weighted stuffed animal that I bought that helps me fall asleep. My storefront prioritizes self-care, while at the same time providing main character energy without the overwhelm. If you have a moment, please go follow me on Amazon.com/shop/mycharacteranalysis. Plus, the link is in the episode description. Listening, and I'll talk to you soon.